Highly Onionated Reviews presents the minute-by-minute synopsis of films. Today's film is Predator, a 1987 film directed by John McTiernan. Disclaimer: even though this is a very rough synopsis of the following film, there may be parts throughout this video that may spoil the movie itself. It is recommended to watch the movie before watching this video. There may also be content, whether from this video or the film itself, that may not be suitable for younger audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. The film begins. Blank space, sprinkled with bits of stars, fills the screen. An object is seen flying into view. Where it's heading, we can only guess. We see a couple of helicopters land on a base by the beach, but the shot is being blocked off by the executive producers. A man in a uniform with an uncomfortable bulge, who will be named Ol McGee, walks down some stairs. Ol McGee meets someone in a big red shirt. He is intimidated by his overwhelming presence, yet equally fascinated by him. The big red shirt man is Arnie, a muscular guy that must have seen a lot of action. He is firmly grasping another man's hand, who will be named Dill, someone who has been clearly thrusting a lot of hand-huggers. Dill, with his exquisitely bold mustache, informs Arnie of a special mission assignment. They must go to non-specifical land, an area where civil wars are taking place, and rescue some fellow Americans. The mission to Arnie smells fishy, but he accepts the job. In the helicopter on the way to the drop zone, Arnie and his men prepare for the mission. A buff cowboy, who will be named Bleeding Bane, offers his mellow yet intimidating friend, who will be named Big Mac, a bag of Big League chews. Big Mac declines, busy applying makeup. While waiting to arrive at the drop zone, Arnie prepares a list of puns to be potentially used in the mission. They finally arrived at the drop zone. Everyone prepares to jump out into the forest below. Whatever waits within the forest, the men are more or less prepared for. Dill lands on the forest floor along with the rest of the crew, checking the area if it's clear of any hostiles. He hopes he brought enough hand-huggers to give to his enemies. It is morning now in the forest. You can see the hot humidity steaming from the trees. We cut to a crashed helicopter that Dill and the explosive expert, who will be named Raincoat, proceed to examine. Apparently, as the drop-off helicopter hastily left, it was too low and crashed into the trees, killing everyone inside. The two men note that some of the bodies are oddly missing. Dill and Raincoat discuss their findings with Arnie, unsure where the other bodies ended up. Still unsure if he should trust Dill, he decides to press forward with the rescue mission. A masculine soul tracker, who will be named Bilsis, scouts the area. It's a lot of work, so he proceeds to drink milk from a tree branch fountain. Quite the refresher. Bilsis suddenly stumbles upon the bodies, now stripped of their comfortable skin and clothes, while hanging upside down by their ankles. Bilsis becomes agitated by this sight, as a wake of vultures flee from the bodies. Arnie and Dill become upset by the sight of the bodies. Who in their right minds delicately removed the bodies' skins and hung them up to dry in the exhausting heat of the forest? They think it was the people that kidnapped the Americans, but Arnie has growing doubts. The crew proceeds to press forward, now more determined to kick some foreign butts, but also, maybe, save some Americans. Arnie checks in on Bilsis, who is still shaken up by the grisly sight. Arnie tries to brighten up the mood by telling him a terrible pun related to the situation, to which Bilsis remains unimpressed. Dill almost stumbles down a hill, but Big Mac helps him up in time. They stare deeply into each other's eyes, either because they don't trust each other, or because they secretly have growing feelings for each other. Whichever sounds pleasing. The crew makes it to the kidnapper's base. Hiding behind an oddly moist log, Arnie proceeds to scout the area with binoculars, hoping the Americans aren't dead yet. Arnie reports to his crew, believing the Americans have been long since dead. Wanting to avenge his fellow compatriots, he orders his crew to ambush and annihilate the entire base. As some of the crew take out the base's watchtowers, Dill observes the area with the radio operator, who will be named Rockin'. They're hoping to get into the action soon. To set up the ambush, Arnie plants explosives in the back of a truck that functioned as the base's generator. He proceeds to pick up the truck and throw it into the base's barracks. It causes a massive explosion, killing at least half of the base's soldiers. That was the cue for the attack. Everyone begins to close in to fight. The kidnappers, realizing they're cannon fodder for the heroes in an action movie, begin to panic fire at the crew. The crew is too much for the kidnappers and proceed to slaughter everyone. Bilsis shoots a soldier down from a distance. The remaining soldiers attempt to flee from the murder spree, but because of the film's contract, they are required to die. Arnie crashes inside a hut, only to find a female kidnapper, who will be named Angon, waiting to strike back. Because of his strong code of ethics, he knocks her out and heads out to inform Dill of his discovery. We see Dill walk into the base of operations, where papers are scattered all about. The main objective the entire time was to acquire and stop plans of a potential country invasion that the kidnappers were secretly plotting. He is excited about his findings. Arnie, overhearing his friend's ulterior motives, expresses his feelings of betrayal and tells him he is tired of his hand-hugger thrustings. He informs Dill of Angon and has him either kill or take her for questioning. Dill decides to take Angon for questioning. He is not a babysitter, and she uncomfortably knows it. Big Mac sees Dill with Angon as a prisoner and expresses his thoughts on the matter. He is either upset that he wasn't being honest with the whole crew, or that Dill doesn't have any feelings toward Big Mac because he is taking along a woman. Suddenly, we cut to thermal vision. Someone, or something, is watching Bilsis laugh at the terrible pun Arnie made earlier. After the crew leaves, the mysterious figure with thermal vision observes the destroyed base and the many fallen soldiers. Even though it has no reason to care for them, it solemnly vows revenge against Arnie's posse. Arnie's crew is trying to flee from the base and is attempting to get to the pickup zone. It is hard to navigate, for the forest is hot and dense. Bleedin' Bane and Big Mac take a short rest. Big Mac notices his friend's injury from the bout against the kidnappers, but Bleeding Bane doesn't have the cadence to exsanguinate. They share a quick snack and press onward with the others. The crew's escape has been going well so far. Nothing appears to be following them, which makes Big Mac and Arnie nervous. Bilsis feels as though the forest is watching the group waiting to strike. He is very uneasy, especially after seeing the skinless pilot crew. Suddenly, Bilsis and Arnie get distracted by something behind them. It appears Angon is attempting to flee from them. How she broke free of her restraints is not essential right now. Rockin chases after her, but before he could restrain her, he gets a sudden case of his blood covering her body in an explosive fashion. Angon will need therapy if she makes it through all of this. The crew tries to find Rockin's body, but it's very difficult to find something that blew up into a visceral bloody mess. It is still very disgusting to look at. The men question Angon about what had happened, suspicious if she murdered their comrade. She is still traumatized and covered in Rockin's blood, really wishing she had therapy right now. We cut to a giant leaf, covered up in either blood or oil. We can assume the mysterious figure was the cause of Rockin's explosive death. Now on high alert, the crew patrols the area of any suspicious activity. Bleedin' Bane gets his minigun revved up and ready for action. Suddenly, Bleedin' Bane gets the sudden case of exploding. However, he has such a butt chin, bold mustache, and iron jaw that he contains the explosion within himself. Tragically, this still causes him to die. Arnie and the rest of the men get angry and frustrated about losing two of their best men that they decide to avenge their comrades by murdering the crap out of the forest. A good, yet environmentally unfriendly alternative to therapy. When the dust settles, the men feel satisfied shooting down the forest. They also realize that their actions will upset environmentalists, resulting in future global warming affecting millions of lives. They flee the area, hoping pinning the blame on the kidnappers instead. Arnie ponders how Bleedin' Bane died. Is there something out there hunting him and his men? What could be causing them to suddenly blow up? He doesn't think too hard about it, for he is busy running away. Now desperate to fly out of there, the men attempt to radio the helicopter to pick them up. They're unable to send a helicopter, however, because the area is too much of a metaphorical and literal hot zone. The men will have to wait until tomorrow for a pickup spot. At night, the crew set up camp and a few security measures. Big Mac expresses his sorrows to Arnie, telling him that although he never had feelings towards Bleeding Bane, he considers him as one of his closest friends. Arnie understands and respects his pain. Big Mac holds a makeshift wake for Bleedin' Bane, reminiscing on the good times they had together, and even pours a flask of liquor on his body. He sheds a single tear and covers his body. Nearby, we realize the mysterious figure is in fact an alien hunter, who will be called the Early Engager, stalking Arnie and his men to exact his last-minute revenge. He is pulling a sliver out of his leg, but it's becoming a tedious process. The men gather around to discuss what is happening. They believe they are most likely being hunted by something really stealthy, and they have technology that surpasses what they have now. It's a crazy thought to have, but anything is possible in the forest. Arnie is unsure if that theory is true, but his men are getting picked off one by one, and he needs to protect them and keep up the morale. He tells the men a terrible pun related to their situation, to which the men are all unimpressed. Late at night, Big Mac is on watch duty, and he is crying. He visualizes Bleeding Bane flying up to the stars, wielding his mighty minigun and trusty Big League chews. Suddenly, some commotion is overheard near Big Mac's location. The men rush over to check out what's going on, ready for a fight. Turns out, it was a distraction to divert everyone's attention so that the Early Engager can take Bleeding Bane's body. Big Mac is incredibly upset by this. It is daytime now, and the whole crew had a rough night's sleep. Arnie is unsure who he is dealing with, nor does he know where this hunter will strike next. He convinces himself that the only way to leave this forest alive is to work together, even if Angon was working with the kidnappers. Much to Dill's disapproval, Arnie cuts Angon's restraints with a comically large knife. In a hot and sweaty montage, the whole team, including Angon, works together to build a complex trap out of the environment in hopes to capture the hunter and have a firm discussion with it. How they are able to build a complex trap within a few hours seems plausible, but montages speed up construction naturally. The trap is coming together. Bilsis gives the cameraman a thumbs up, letting the director know they're ready to film the trap. Dill gives a sentimental stare towards Big Mac. He apologizes to him that he lied about the mission, for he was doing it for the love of his country. He gives his condolences for Big Mac's loss. Big Mac, although upset yet touched by his words, accepts his apology and condolences. As Angon gives a boring speech about where she thinks the hunter came from, Arnie gets distracted by some movement high above the trees. In order to lure the hunter into the trap, Arnie steps out in the middle of the trap, unsure where the hunter will strike. He murmurs to himself a joke in relation to his situation, still unimpressed and wishing he could do better. The Early Engager, who is not as stupid as they appear to be, uncloaks from his camouflage device and taunts the men for wasting so much time setting up this trap only to be foiled. The men try to attack the hunter, but during the scuffle, the trap accidentally gets set off, injuring Raincoat critically. They need to get to the pickup helicopter, so Arnie and Angon carry Raincoat to the pickup area while Bilsis leads. Meantime, Big Mac and Dill run off to finish off the Early Engager. Dill, wielding two awesome submachine guns in both hands, loses sight of Big Mac. He was hiding all along, waiting for the hunter to appear. He embraces Dill, expressing his feelings towards him, and hopes before he dies that he feels the same. Dill, although embarrassed, expresses the same feelings towards Big Mac. After a quick smooch, they sneak towards the Early Engager. They split in different directions in hopes to surround the hunter and ambush it. This is a very tense situation, especially for Big Mac. Meanwhile, the rest of the men are running as fast as they can to the pickup zone. If only they could leave the wounded behind and run faster, but alas, they care too much for Raincoat. Dill finds out that after getting separated from his newly found lover, Big Mac caught the sudden case of exploding off-screen. Dill is traumatized by his sudden loss. Distressed, he begs the Early Engager to fight him man-to-man so he doesn't have to suffer long without the love of his life. The hunter accepts his request and proceeds to diagnose him with a case of sudden stab wounds. Realizing how bleak their situation is, Bilsis stays behind while the others flee. He is going to sacrifice himself, stabbing himself in hopes the open holes of his body prevent him from receiving the case of exploding. He dies, still exploding. Before they make it to the pickup zone, Raincoat also gets a sudden case of explosion and dies. Arnie almost dies from the same case, but his gun receives it instead. He screams at Angon, "Come into possession of the wally pad!" Arnie, wounded from the exploding gun, attempted to get the attention of the Early Engager by running away in a different direction. However, he suddenly jumps off a waterfall, performing a fantastic Olympic-level flip into the water below, all while being in slow motion. Despite the tall height, Arnie, of course, survives the fall and attempts to swim towards the shoreline of the raging river. Now covered in mud, Arnie realizes that his escape was futile, for he was followed by the early engager. He lodges himself onto a small pile of sticks and awaits his diagnosis of sudden explosion. However, the early engager's heat vision could not distinguish what is human and what is the ground. Thus, he couldn't see mud-covered Arnie within the pile of sticks. In frustration, it diagnoses a nearby rat with sudden explosion and walks away. Realizing his tactical advantage, Arnie climbs up a big old tree and prepares to plan his next course of action. Another montage occurs. He begins to set up traps all around the area. It's amazing how so much of the surrounding material is sturdy enough to not break unless needed. It is also astounding that Arnie could do the work that requires a whole crew to pull off. Darkness begins to fall. Arnie, in the glow of the warm campfire, constructs a bow with a bundle of arrows. He is confident in his knowledge of guns that he would probably know how to use a bow and arrow. He also prepares a special set of arrows, which are also called Rambosian arrows, that will imminently suffer a sudden case of explosion if it hits a solid object. He must be careful handling them so he won't explode as well. Now ready to face the early engager, Arnie applies his muddy makeup. It takes a few moments, for it's not easy to apply mud in every crevice of your muscular body. He alerts the hunter of his presence by lighting a bonfire to set up his respawn point, and proceeds to let a different voice actor yell as if he was Tarzan. No one believes it was Arnie's real voice. Waiting for the hunter, he firmly hugs a tree. He's hoping his own camouflage will work as the early engager slowly approaches. Once again, the hunter could not detect Arnie through his makeshift camo. It walks past him, while Arnie, who is more confident that his plan is working, begins to set off the traps. Frustrated that somebody started a fire that could burn the whole forest down, the early engager begins to shoot wildly in the dark, hoping he'll hit whoever caused the fire. Arnie watches the hunter's blind frustration from a safe distance. He cleverly throws a rock at a distance to distract and reveal the hunter's position. The early engager is now on edge and fires blindly at the noise, for they can't see the perpetrator causing the forest fire. Arnie throws a Rambosian arrow at the hunter, injuring it from the sudden case. Smelling the blood of the creature, he tracks the hunter with a comically large knife attached to a pole. But Arnie realizes that he was deceived, throwing off its tracks to silently ambush him from behind. However, the hunter still has a hard time seeing him, so he throws a makeshift flash grenade to distract it and runs for cover. It was to no avail, unfortunately, for in his escape, his muddy makeup slipped off his muscular body and reveals his position to the hunter. It grapples Arnie, ready to diagnose him with sudden stab wounds. Realizing that Arnie is the last one alive, the early engager decides to take its time killing him. It proceeds to strip in front of him, revealing its true alien appearance. Arnie is not sure if he should be fascinated, disgusted, or really aroused by the scene. The early engager is revealed to be a space crab, or as we come to know them as, crustaceans. Arnie realizes it is one plain, contemptible person. Insulted, the hunter proceeds to beat the living daylights out of him. Arnie is no match for the hunter in a 1v1 bout. It is starting to look like things will end tragically for him if he doesn't think of anything soon. Remembering he has a trap he spent a montage preparing, he positions himself in an appealing corner and beckons the hunter to terminate him. Although the early engager saw through the trap, Arnie counters with a trap within the trap and crushes the hunter with a giant log. Arnie thinks he won, but the log seemingly didn't kill it, as the block of wood starts to slowly move. Turns out, the early engager is done for, as his body was crushed and is unable to move. He respects the fight Arnie put up, and proceeds to diagnose itself with a sudden case of exploding. Arnie tells a pun related to the situation, and runs away as the dying hunter laughs hysterically. Meanwhile, the pickup helicopter has no idea where it's going, as it gets caught in the shock wave of the explosion. Angon and Ol McGee are on the ship, hoping to find any other remaining survivors of Arnie and his crew. They spot Arnie, the only survivor of the explosion, and proceed to pick him up from the destroyed forest. While riding back home on the helicopter, he ponders on the crew he lost, the creature he encountered, and whether anyone will believe his story. He devises a pun related to the overall story and smiles as the screen fades. The end.